So Mary, hello, and welcome to another YDA chat of mine. I am so excited that you're actually part of this, and I was, we were trying to get a hold of each other, and I'm so glad that we actually managed to do this. I am a big fan, and in the whole world of the YDA ex-winners that I'm talking to, you actually have an interesting background because you actually are working in the world of TV series, let's put it that way. And but you come from a little bit of a different background, let's say, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask you a question that I ask everybody. First of all, hello, and I babble a lot, so allow me to stop me whenever you want.
Okay.
What is your background? Not professionally. Start with your background as somebody that came into filmmaking as a director, but what kind of family do you have? Is your family creative? Did they teach you creative?
That's a good question. Yeah, so my parents are both actors.
Yes.
And their background was not in that world at all.
Mm-hmm.
So my dad's background, he grew up with parents who were, his mum was a nurse and his father was a car mechanic.
Wow.
And my mum's background is, again, very far from that. So her dad was a dentist and her mum was a hairdresser.
Wow.
And then they met. They're both from quite different backgrounds themselves.
Yes.
They met. My mum had been to university.
Yep.
She's quite intellectual.
Yep.
My dad was really into music and poetry, but left school at 15.
Yes.
And they met at doing a play at the National Theatre.
Yes. They were both in it, right?
They were both in it. It was a David Hare play.
Yeah.
Called A Map of the World.
Yeah.
And so I grew up in a house where, I'd say that art, culture, reading was very valued.
Yes.
But people were kind of taken on their own merit. So because my parents came from different backgrounds and had different references, it wasn't about high culture versus low culture. It was just kind of really.
Yeah.
What you could offer.
It was also about talent, right?
And about talent, exactly. Yeah.
Right. So and then you grew up in this family of two actors who met while acting.
Mm-hmm.
And you decide as a kid that at a certain point you want to be fill in the blank.
Well, I didn't want to be an actor. I wanted to be a vet quite a long time. And then I wanted to be a ballet dancer.
Yes.
And every time I would say I want to be a vet or I want to be a ballet dancer, my mom would say, that's a very hard life. That's very competitive.
I have to tell you something too. I'm going to tell you my story.
And then, so I was like, oh shit, well, that's probably too hard.
Yeah.
And then people kept saying to me, people kept offering me jobs. So I did my first radio play as an actor when I was 13.
Wow.
And then I did another one when I was 15.
Yeah.
And my parents were saying, no, you can't act. You can't
have that be your career.
No, but radio was okay because no one could see me.
Yes.
And then when I was 17, I was like, I really want to have a go at acting.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, you're about to be 18.
Yeah.
You're basically an adult.
Yeah.
So, and I got an agent, partly because I was part of the National Youth Theatre, which is a really cool organization in Britain, which is open to anyone. You just audition.
Yeah.
And so I got an agent, and then I got my first job in TV when I was 17 and still at school.
That's great.
And it was terrifying, but
I can imagine. And your parents reacted, hey, that's a job, so maybe she can make it, right?
Yeah, I think their reaction was always like, they were quite quiet, but they were like, good for you.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
Because I think in general, they knew that if you had talent, you would actually move forward, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I think they were quite surprised because things started happening for me quite quickly.
Yes.
I got my first feature film role, and it was the lead when I was 19.
Wow.
And then I worked with Sofia Coppola when I was 21.
Yep.
In Marie Antoinette, which was a dream come true for me because she was one of my favorite filmmakers.
Yep.
And I remember my parents just looking at me like,
she's actually having a career.
And I was like, It's a bit easy. Actually, it was through working with Sofia Coppola that I'd already been directing plays at school.
Yes.
And at university. And then I thought I'd really like to make a film because she was so different to the other directors that I'd seen or heard of.
Yeah.
And I wrote a script while I was on her set.
Yes.
Which became my first short film. So I shot her film in the spring, and then I came back, and in the summer with a group of friends, I made that short film.
That's fantastic.
Then the way that I got money to make another short film, and it was with that short film, the second short film, that I entered film school.
Oh wow! Did directing become? Did you bump into directing? Did you bump into it because of Sophia? Is that?
Well, I certainly bumped into film directing because of her. Because theatre directing, I'd really enjoyed at school and at university, and I also helped set up a new writing theatre festival called High Tide, which still exists.
No.
But I honestly hadn't thought of film directing.
Yeah.
And it's sort of embarrassing to say this, but it's because all of the film directors I had seen were men.
Oh.
And they were quite big men, like.
Yep.
And they were quite loud.
Yes.
They shouted a lot.
Very present, like.
Yeah. And then there was this sort of quite precise, quiet, intelligent woman who had a total vision. And I thought, okay, so you don't have to be like that. You can be like
that. And what a director. I mean, I would dare to say probably one of the 10 best directors in the world right now, authorially speaking, like as an author, right? So, and I personally don't love the whole like woman director, men director. I think directing is about directing and having a vision and wanting to speak it. But unfortunately, we still do make that distinction, right? So you are a female director, and unfortunately,
I'd like to be a unicorn director, but that option isn't open to me.
But you're still working on that.
Thing, but
you never pass the casting.
No, I just don't have the horn, So,
or it doesn't stick, it just falls off. But it's interesting. It's like I actually personally, want to ask you questions about that, but I don't want to get into that whole world of men, women, men directing, and whether female directors have to speak about certain things and talk about certain things to actually be taken in consideration, which I think is the other worry that we all have in this business, which is you're a female director, you have to talk about issues that have to do with women, right? And you can't shoot a car chase scene, right? And you don't get called to do the next, Wonder Woman film, right?
Well, except that obviously then Catherine Bigelow went and won the Oscar. For
Absolutely.
And I admire the Hurt Locker partly because I think she was brave enough, particularly the scene in that film where the three men are in the barracks and they're wrestling.
Yes.
He finds a wedding ring in the box and there's a kind of joking around it, and then they get into this fight.
For
me, that scene is full. It's a brilliant scene.
Yes.
It's also full of homoerotic energy.
Absolutely.
And I think it's super interesting because for me, it takes somebody. I don't think it has to be a woman, but it has to be somebody willing to look at male relationships that can be quite taboo. Talk about, even if we all know it exists.
My wife and I, on a completely different note, talk about this because we always say, she always says when soccer players, football players score a goal, they have this homoerotic moment where they touch each other a lot, right? Like and she feels that is weird, that is strange, because they are allowed something in the cheering of the moment that has a little bit of a nuance of a homoerotic moment, right? Right? They can kiss and hug and really embrace and
enjoy contact,
fall on the ground, right? And right? It's just very strange, but it's interesting that that scene is actually, now that you mention it that way, it's true. It's a very courageous scene, right?
Yeah. And of course, I admire Claire Denis as well.
Yeah.
And she made a brilliant film which has got lots of different undertones of sensuality between men, called Beau Travail. I'm going to say it in my terrible English accent. Beau Travail.
Beau Travail.
Good work in English.
I'm Italian. I don't speak French.
Well, I do speak French, but I still have a strong English accent. But I love that film as well. And Denis Lermont, who plays the lead in that, extraordinary actor. And there's a lot of sensuality in that between the men, because of course that exists, you know. And I suppose when we talk about who's directing, whether it be, you know, unicorns or white women like me,
which I think you have a thing about. I'm just going to say.
I have a 3-year-old and she's obsessed with unicorns. So.
Okay.
But what I suppose I mean is that the more voices you have, the more that the world gets. There's more that there is to discover, right?
Yeah. Which is one of my questions, I think. And I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, but I think it actually has to do about this. But I think authorially, do you think, what is your voice? What is the things that you like to say? Or do you think you should say, or the stories you want to tell, do you think they need to be all one way? Do you think authors can actually talk about different things?
I think people end up talking about a lot of times. I think the stories that you tell have those similar patterns.
Yes.
And I think often people don't know what those patterns are. Yeah. And it's only when they look back on a body of work that they can say, oh, okay, so that's what I mean, when I directed a play at the Soho Theatre years ago now, 9 years ago, and called Shallow Slumber, which was written by a great playwright who's also a social worker. And it was about a mother who kills her baby and the social worker who has to kind of uncover this. And at the time, a journalist said, oh, Mary's work deals a lot with motherhood. And I was like, no, it doesn't. And then, of course, you know, I think there are themes of that in my work.
Yes.
And I have a feature film that I want to make, which is about a mother and a daughter. But I think I won't probably know what the recurrent themes are.
When you look back at it, right?
70. Yeah, exactly. You can tell me when I'm 70.
Well, it's interesting because we will talk when you're 70. I'm just saying it. So just get ready. We're just going to be 1 million years from now. And
God will know so much, hopefully.
Is there something that you think that is different between doing feature film, and I know you do TV series, so the serial work that you do, I mean, do you like the fact that it's a different way of telling the story? Or do you think it's the same in a weird way? Do you think a TV series is 8 hour in an 8 hour long feature film, or do you think it's a feature film needs to be directed in a different way?
Well, I think what happens in TV is that you're one of many voices.
Yeah.
So I'm not in the position of somebody like Jean-Marc Vallée, who is making the whole of Sharp Objects or the whole of Big Little Lies. I mean, I would love to be. I hope to be it someday. But
someday.
I'm doing, you know, episodes, and there are other directors working on their episodes. And then the writers have a very strong voice in TV. And then also the TV execs have a very strong voice. So you're trying to serve the story as best you can and the actors while bringing something of your personality and your style to the TV show. But
and also follow the style of the TV show, right? You have
yes, exactly. So it's this sort of odd situation where you're trying to sneak in a little bit of your style.
Your thing,
Whereas obviously with a feature film or with a short film or a commercial to an extent, or a play, you can design everything. And you have more freedom in some ways.
So you have to study a little bit, right? When you walk into a TV show that has already started and has its own look and feel, and you have to kind of like go, what does that mean? And what leeway do I have, right? And how much can I put Mary in it, right? Is that how it is?
That is exactly how it is. And I've been lucky enough that the 2 of the shows that I've worked on are new shows. And so it's not like the second season where this is how it looks. So you can have a bit more freedom to sort of discover stuff.
because you're part of the conceptualization of the actual new show, right? So yeah. And do you like jumping around?
Yeah, I do. I'm quite impatient as a person.
Yeah.
I love working with new people.
Yep.
I think there's something quite exhilarating about, I mean, any freelancer will tell you this, I'm sure you know this. But you know, when what's the culture? What's the culture of this job?
Oh yeah.
You know, what are these people like? What's the work ethic?
Yep.
What's the dynamic? What's you know, it's a bit adrenalized. It's exciting.
No, I think it's also a really interesting moment in time for directors, right? So, and I think while before crossing the line between one world and another was a little more of an exception. I'm not saying that it wouldn't happen, because it did, right? So Ridley Scott moved from one place to another, and Adrian Lyne, and all of them men, by the way, still, you know. And when they moved, it was news, right? That you actually moved from music videos to, I don't know, feature films. And I would say not always those jumps would actually work. Nowadays, there's actually an interesting thing, because creating a TV show is more similar to the advertising world than it is to the film world. Doing a feature film is actually much more complicated in a different way, is more authorial, as you said, right? And so I think that being a director today is actually interesting, because you might do eight episodes of a TV series, and then you might be working on your feature film, and then you do 2 commercials in the meanwhile, and you do your short film, and it becomes more interesting, because it allows you to, I'll use a bad word, vomit your talent in a different way, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, and also those projects require different things from a director. So if you're, in terms of your time,
yes,
you're trying to make a feature, it can take years, of course.
Yeah.
And if you're on a TV show, sometimes it can still take a long time. It can take a year to make, but usually they hire you as the director a month away. So you're like, oh, I'm doing that. And with a commercial, of course, even shorter period shooting and finishing it, so it's quite satisfying because you've done it. You've made something.
Do you miss acting?
No. No, I don't at all. I always felt like a lemon.
Yeah.
When I was acting.
You're a good lemon. You're a unicorn.
I think a surprising number of actors feel like lemons.
Yes.
Whenever actors say to me, you know, do you miss acting? And I say no, because I always felt like such a lemon. They say, well, I feel like a lemon all the time.
I feel like a lemon all the time.
Exactly. I feel like a lemon right now. Different people can tolerate that feeling differently.
Yeah.
I guess I love being part of the crew. I really love it. Yeah. And I found that I really just, because when I was working, when I was training at film school, I did a little bit of acting on the side.
Yes.
And I tried to talk to the crew.
Yes.
It was a female DP, female director, and I was like, oh, amazing, I can talk to them. And I remember the female DP said to me, because I was talking to her about how she was lighting, and she said to me, if you're interested in cinematography, there's a magazine called Cinematographers, and you can read it. And I was like, okay, cool. So you don't want to talk to me?
No.
There's like this weird, there shouldn't be, but there is a weird dividing line between the actors and the crew. And once I'd had a taste of what it was like to be with the crew, I just wanted to be with them. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, because it feels like acting for you was the stepping stone to move to what you end up actually liking more, right? So you close the door, right? Yeah.
Close the door, yeah.
And there's some actors that do the opposite, right? They come back to acting because they tried directing, but their world is still acting, as lemon as they feel when they act.
Yeah, and I guess also they must, I'm sure that some actors who, after they've directed, improve as actors or have a different quality that they can bring to acting.
Do your parents think that you did the right thing? Do they like your career?
Yeah, I think I've never asked them.
Okay.
I'm incredibly private. And I think that's partly because they have big reputations, they're talented people.
Yeah.
So I kind of for example, I never show them a work in progress.
No way.
They never see an early cut, they never see a script. It's always like finished, and then like, oh, do you want to watch it?
That's so great.
So, and then they're often like, oh, great, yeah. But I, so I don't really know. But I think my dad said to me once, I thought maybe there wouldn't be enough in acting for you.
Interesting. Very interesting. I love that sentence, because you have to know that that same thing that your mom used to do when you were actually thinking about different career paths, right? But when I started by wanting to put the asphalt on the roads, because I thought it was really cool to actually put asphalt on the roads. So my mom actually took me aside and said, that's really not a thing, you know, like you don't want to be in the middle of tar all day. I was like, okay, fine. Then I wanted to become an archaeologist. Took me aside and said, you don't want to be in the middle of the, you know, desert, you know, with a little, it's like, no, okay, I want to be a director, I said, right? Because that's what I wanted to do. And my mom is like, you don't want to be a frustrated director that does, you know, films that nobody watches. I was like, okay, that sounds really, but that's kind of how I started. You know, I actually found a path, and then when I started doing it, they asked me, you know, what do you do? I was like, oh, I decided I don't want to direct anymore because I'm not as good as the directors that I love. And that's the thing that I like about directors like you. You actually fall into a world that is yours, right? You found it. And it's a voyage, right? It's a path, and hopefully it's going to be for a very long time, and that's great, you know.
Yeah.
So I think my other question is, you like the authorial part of your work too, right? You write your things.
So at the moment, the two things I'm working on at the moment, most of the things I'm working on at the moment, I haven't written. I have written things in the past for other people. And I've worked on my short films. I mostly either write them or work with somebody. And sometimes when I was pitching for commercials or fashion films, I would write
your own pitches, your own ideas.
But I'd say my strength is probably more as a really good reader. I'm good strength. With writers. I love working with writers.
Yeah, because you when you say good reader, means understanding what you're reading so that you can actually make it your own as a director, right? It's like
and also offer ideas, because I think
adjust it.
Because I think it's very easy, as you will know from reading. When you read a script, you can say straight away often what's wrong with it. But then I think there's a slightly different thing to be able to say, here's some ideas. Here's some positives.
How to fix it and adjust it, and how it flow the right way and the right words. You know, I think it's interesting, and I think it's interesting to me that you're conscious of it, right? You're conscious of the fact that, you know, you might write your own things, and you wrote the thing. You wrote your film for the YDA, the one that won the YDA, right?
I did, with my friend Zoe Franklin. We wrote it together.
So this is some years ago, not many years ago, but some years ago, and we're keeping you young. Remember that.
Thank you.
Unicorns don't age. Remember that.
Right, that is right.
Unicorns don't have an age, by the way. So you can, right?
They don't exist. So, you know.
Hey, if you have a horn right here, I'll believe you exist. So you got to the YDA by sending your film that you co-wrote and directed, and how was it? How was there a before or after? Did you went to Cannes, right, to pick up the?
Yeah, it was really important to me, because that film, Handprint, which was in the charity category that I made, took us a long time to get the money for, and it was for a cause that we all believed in, which was highlighting the situation of garment workers and trying to encourage people, which is now a big movement, obviously, to think about the people who made their clothes.
So anything that you're wearing actually
vintage. I was going to. It's actually vintage, and I'm trying to buy more things that are secondhand or vintage.
But the concept of your piece was anything that you wear has a background to it, and there are people that actually made it, and the people that made it might not have been working in, let's say, the best situations, and if and they were working the best situations. Just imagine that they're maybe not even working close to you. They're not like, they're in different places of the world, and the concept actually was very much of a symbolism of that, right?
Yeah, it was about, if you, whatever you're wearing, the top you're wearing there, how many hands touched it before you wore it, and what were their stories, and who were those people? Because I think the facelessness of a lot of the people who work on our clothes or in other sectors is a problem, because it allows us to dehumanize them and treat them less fairly than we would want to be treated ourselves. Lower pay, bad working conditions, etc. And Rana Plaza, which happened in Bangladesh, was really in the forefront of all of our minds. And Livia Firth, who with EcoAge was behind the film as well, is still, agitating to try and change the conditions for garment workers in Bangladesh, but throughout the world as well. So that was, but then we wanted something, because obviously if you tell people the statistics and if you make it into a polemic, it doesn't touch people in the same way.
Absolutely.
So we wanted something very simple of, it's about touch. It's about people like you who just live in a different place and have a different job. And the idea that they're present with you in some way. Whenever you get dressed in the morning, what you put on, it's like you've got all of the faces of the people around you who touch your clothes before you put them on. So it's very central, actually.
But the way you actually tell that story and the way you actually story tell it is very interesting, because it you don't say it all at once. Let's put it that way. Leaving aside that you're actually using a rhetorical figure to tell it, right? So you're actually imagining it as if it were happening as a woman is getting dressed, right? So people are actually helping, other people are helping that woman getting dressed. And I suggest everybody go and see the film, because it's actually on the YDA website, so you can actually see it. It is interesting to me because it is a very strong image film, but it's also, it has a storytelling aspect to it that is very strong to this in the same way, right? It's like, it makes you think. The way you tell the story makes you get to the end and go, oh wow, right? It's like, because it takes you in one direction and it slowly reveals itself, right? It doesn't immediately reveal itself.
Well, I guess suspense is quite important, and narrative can be a reveal. I guess.
Absolutely.
Especially when you're working in a really short format.
Yes.
Some people have described short films of any kind, whether they're commercials or more activist films, whatever, as a kind of joke with a punchline, because it's set up and then it's joke. It's the payoff.
Yes.
So you're kind of you're trying to build tension and then reveal what the end result is. And I think my friend Zoe and I, who were writing a few fashion films at that time, we obviously made Handprint, but we also were making films for Vogue and for Karen Millen and other companies. Our big thing was narrative.
Yes.
Because often when you watch fashion films, they're incredibly beautiful.
Yeah, but
nothing's really happening.
Blah. It's like whatever.
It's like a still shoot with a camera, with a moving camera. And so we really wanted to get story in there somehow.
Having done many of them, it's like most of them were like, we'll just shoot people, and some of them will be in slow motion, and something will happen. I was like, okay, fine.
There's a lot of like flair and
flair, and sure.
Right, I love watching that stuff.
No, I like it too. I'm not criticizing it. It's just that's how they started, and some of them actually continued that way, and some of them actually have a point now. They become branded.
Well, and also I think I'm a storyteller. I like stories.
Yeah, which was my other thing. Is like, you feel like you're a storyteller, right?
Yeah.
Because I feel like you're a storyteller, and I just met you, so.
Well, I hope so. Yeah, I think so. I studied, before I went to film school, I studied English literature.
Yes.
And my first love before movies or theatre is novels.
Yes. I mean, so, I think everything that you talked about in the past, minutes is very much about storytelling, right? This the story of your life and the story of being an actor, and being an actor means telling stories, right? Your parents' story. When I asked you about your parents, you told me the background of your parents. You told me the story of your grandparents, which is actually interesting.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, it's very much ingrained in you to tell stories, and that's why I would say, you know, even in the, not only in the work that you do, but also in the type of person that you are, you actually like that. You actually comes with that, right? It's because you are interested in people, right?
Yeah, and I think people who, I think in terms of the charity category of the YDA, and in terms of helping change people's minds about something, or awareness of something, story can be really useful.
Very much, yeah.
It's easier to remember.
Yeah.
It's easier to remember a story than it is to remember statistics or facts.
It's true.
And abstract as well.
And facts become, it's easy to give your point of view through it's easier to give your point of view through a story. If you give it through facts, you are putting it in the level of a presentation, and I think it becomes a little bit it might get prone to not being understood the right way. Let's put it that way. Right? So I find that interesting. So anyway, you get with your film, you decide to send it to the YDA, and then it wins, right?
Yeah, it was extremely exciting, obviously, and it was also something that really struck me going to Cannes. And obviously, this year I understand that it's virtual, but I still think there is this opportunity to see all the other films that are made, and to read about the other directors, to see the range of directors, the diversity, to read about the judges. I think I'm always fascinated by how people come to directing, how people come to writing. I kind of want to know, you know. And I also love seeing other people's work. So that was really big. I loved that.
So you're happy that we didn't cancel it this year, right?
I'm so happy. I think it's brave and bold and good.
Yeah. I think it would have been a really big miss, right? Because of the fact that it's not a creative award, but it's a talent-driven award. It's a crafting-driven award. I think it doesn't have the problems, especially in the judging part, that other awards have nowadays, which is understandable, right? You actually go and judge creative, and you kind of look at these things that were done just 3 months ago, and you're like, I just don't know how to judge that with today's eyes, right? Because everything is too fresh. The bruise is too fresh, whether the coronavirus has hit you or not, or whether the lockdown has been something good or bad for you, but we're going through something that has shaken up everything. And creative awards, I understand that have problems, right? This would have been a big miss. You know, people would have missed not knowing what the new directors of the world are, because the YDA is still very much, after 23 years, looked at as a place where the Marys of the world come out, right? Do you feel like that happened when you actually won? Do you feel like there was a little bit more interest in you?
Definitely. I mean, I think it's super useful in terms of visibility. And even more so for people who don't have my background of being an actor, of being, you know, having parents in the industry. Of course, it's really useful. And also, I think there's the public recognition and the industry recognition and the jobs that will get you. Then there's also the fact of personal recognition. I think it confirms, it's quite useful, confirmation. Oh, someone thinks you can direct. That's good.
It's like, oh yeah, there's
confidence.
People actually like me.
I should be doing this. Yeah.
And so it's very interesting, and I think it is, regardless, you know, something that helped you in your career, right? So you can say that it helped you. Yeah,
it definitely helped me in my career. Yeah, it helped me in my career, and I'm sure it gave me a good 6 months of work.
Which is
great. It helped Handprint as a film get out there further, which helped deliver the message that we were trying to promote. You know, so that was great as well.
And I think the other thing that is interesting that Francois Chilot, right? He's always trying to make it relevant. So I think the fact that some of the winners are part of the jury is something that we talked about this year, and we also talked about, he always talks about how to, make the competition interesting and according to the time that we live in, right? So one of the things that he's doing is one of the things that we did this year is that we started this really weird, interesting, up to the point category this year, which is the dream pitch category, right? And the dream pitch category, which let's say is a test, but is an interesting test, is about the fact that we have gotten to a point where we look for ideas, right? And sometimes directors pitch ideas, like you just said that you did, especially in the fashion world. Do you think ideas should get closer to production? Do you think directors should actually be close to the idea? Difficult question, huh?
Do you mean in the world of advertising, or in?
I'll just leave it up there.
What I will say is that across the board, whatever medium you're working in,
yes,
the more singular the vision,
yes,
if it's a good vision,
yes,
the better the end product.
Yes.
So you can tell when you watch something,
yes,
how complete the vision is.
Yes.
And the more people you add,
yes,
to the process,
yes,
the more diluted that becomes.
That is something that is, to me, very interesting, because I was talking to somebody a couple of days ago. Anyway, but I was talking about this because I have a group of friends, two friends who are also creatives in an agency, and they say they have their own agency, and they say ideas that are strong can be told in 12 words.
Mm.
And the concept of the 12-word concept, I think, is actually really fun, because that brings it to a visual aspect, right? So I think that sometimes ideas get watered down, and when they get watered down, it's because you add more words to it, right? So an idea that ends up becoming an 18-word idea is probably a little more watered down than the 12-word idea, right? And I think it's interesting. I think it's something that we sometimes forget, and I personally live in the advertising side of the world, although my company does both worlds. Not both, but all three worlds. I don't know how many worlds there are, but there are many worlds. Does long formats and short formats. But it's interesting to me that we sometimes lose the core of the idea. Mm-hmm. We sometimes lose, in advertising especially, the idea of how to pitch, how to go in front of somebody and say, this is what is good. This is what I thought, right? The idea of the elevator pitch, right?
Clarity. And I think you're right about the less words you use,
yes, the
better discipline it is for the people making it.
Yes.
And you can tell very quickly, I think, how clear somebody is about what they're making by how many ands they add.
Yeah, that's great. That's
so
great.
If they say that it's about the loss of a dog, and also the Second World War, and also the owner of the dog, he's just getting over a breakup. You're like, which story are we talking about? I was with the dog, and now I'm really lost.
Yeah.
So I think and I don't think it's easy to be able to say really unequivocally, this is the story I'm telling. This is my idea.
Yeah.
I think something that at the National Film and Television School where I trained, they made us do over and over again was simplify. Yeah.
Interesting.
And be really clear about what you're talking about. I also think that one of the difficulties in making anything is that you're not painting a portrait, you're not writing a novel, you're working with lots of people.
Exactly.
And all of them might have a slightly different conception of what you're making.
Right, which actually brings me to a half question. Because the other half is the rest of your answer. But my half question is, how much is collaboration important for you as a director, not as a director in general, for you as a director, and how much do you think it is, as a female director, important for you to set a tone on the type of director that you are when you deal with a set? Because one thing that directors, female or male, that are good, that I've worked with in my life, that I see, is that they control a set. And control doesn't mean about being mean or angry or big or loud. It's about control. It's about knowing how to deal with the good and the bad that a set brings, and the magic that it allows you to have, right? With the unicorns included. But but that said, do you have a consciousness of that?
Of course, yeah. I completely agree with you that good directors set the tone on set, and it infects everybody for good or bad.
Yes.
And it's your job. Your job is both to do the job,
yes,
and to manage your own feelings about the job. So your stress, your anxiety, your uncertainty, and to control those, so that other people can feel confident.
Yes.
And safe.
Yes. Yeah. Safe.
So I think regardless of your gender or origin, or because that just is so, as you say, it's so true. You're a leader, so you have to behave like.
Yeah, because you're a leader on every side. Like, you're not only leading the actors in having them do what you have in your mind as a vision, but also you're leading people, a lot of people. You're leading a group.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? You're leading a grip that is actually pushing your dolly, right? It's like, and you have to understand how to actually explain that. And sometimes you explain it without words. Sometimes you explain it by just being who you are. And it's incredible, like, I think it's a role that is amazing, because I think it's interesting. Like, one of the directors that I interviewed on the chats said, I was an editor. Then I started doing other things. When I realized that I wasn't doing something, I realized I was becoming a director, right? So when I realized that I wasn't holding a boom or I wasn't pushing a dolly.
Well, the crew talk about that a lot. It's a luxury. It's a luxury, privilege to be the director,
right?
And you have to work harder than anyone to earn that right.
Do you think it's more difficult today for a female to be a director than a male?
Well, it depends which country you're talking about.
Yeah.
And it depends what color your skin is, probably, as well.
Yeah, that's true.
I would say that there's been a huge, only from the world that I know, is mostly in England, and as a white woman who has parents in the industry, I would say that there's a huge drive to get women into directing. I've never experienced it as a problem. But I'm a certain age as well. If you speak to directors in their 50s who are women, they've had a very different experience to me. My experience has been overwhelmingly positive, and I think also I sometimes think it can be really useful to be a woman on set, because I'm never going to win an arm wrestle. Do you know what I mean?
No, absolutely, yeah.
I've got like zero machismo.
But you're not even willing to participate in having somebody asking a question about wanting to arm wrestle or not, right?
No, that's quite fun, because
you won't even get yourself there.
No, and I've had sometimes I play with that on set, because femininity or however you inhabit your femaleness can be a strength. Like, you don't have to be, my original conception of a director as being this alpha male, powerful, older, usually white, alpha male. It's actually so far from the truth, and people are quite refreshed, I think.
I agree.
To find a kind of director who handles things differently. I mean, I think I use my sense of humor. I use the fact that I'm trying to be quite collaborative and friendly as tools to work with people.
But when you actually have to say something, people have to listen to you, right? Because at a certain point, a director will say, we're doing it this way, right? All collaboration aside, at a certain point, you will take everything and say, okay, I understand that. We'll do it this way because this works better, because it will tell the story better, because I actually thought it in my mind, or whatever it is. And I think that is important. That moment is important.
Well, it's about how you have authority.
Yes.
But there are many ways to have authority.
Absolutely. No, which is not screaming most of the times.
No, and actually it's a bit like a teacher in the classroom.
Yeah.
As soon as they start shouting, they've lost the class.
Absolutely, yes. It's true. It's
so
true.
I think it's the same for a director.
It is actually exactly like a teacher.
How prepared you are.
Yeah.
How much work you've done.
Yes.
How well you know what you're talking about.
Yes.
And the conviction with which you say it.
Yes, it's true. It's true. And that's what acting taught you.
Well, I think
I'm probing you.
I think it's more about the privilege of the job, as you were talking about.
Yes.
And if you've had a bit like the director you were talking about, who said he'd had many jobs before he became a director.
It's true, yeah.
If you've done any other job, it's the dream.
Yes, it's true.
And it's so you have to deserve it.
Are you living your dream?
Yeah. I mean, so.
It would be weird if you said no.
It's like, terrible. I hate it.
Horrible.
I'm so sad. No, when I walk onto set, I feel so excited.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So excited and so. I don't take drugs, but it's like I'm high.
Yeah. I don't take drugs either, and I always said the same thing. I would say, the high that I get walking on a set is incredible because you've talked about it, you've thought about it, you've stayed awake, and then you've been angry and happy and worried, and then at a certain point you walk there and you have to do it, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Us as producers or EPs or whatever we are, but we bring people together and we try to tell that story. And the thing that people don't realize, which is the fight that I always have, is I always have this fight about crediting the credits. Mm-hmm. Especially in advertising. Agencies and clients write their credits, right? But then they forget the director, they forget the production company, they forget the editor, they forget, it's like when you see the so-and-so agency and so-and-so for that client, they did this thing. I was like, they didn't do it, really. I mean, they thought it, but then somebody else did it with them,
Yeah. Well, it plays to what you were asking me about collaboration and how important it is to me. And I would say it's 90% of the fun.
I think so too, yeah.
And it's also what I love about it as well.
Yeah.
I mean, because if you want to make things by yourself, I just sort of think, well, be a novelist or be a fine artist, make video art,
paint something on a canvas, and
totally,
do. I mean, it's fine, but
it's great, and those are all fantastic, amazing things to do. But it's if you love working with people, then it's a good job to have.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I've always liked that because of that. I love the people and the talent that we bring on board, and what that talent brings. I realized when my mom told me that being a director was going to be like, doing useless films that nobody saw. I actually
supportive.
I was like, I hope
invisible. No one is going to see them ever.
Nobody's going to see your films. I was like, okay, that sounds horrible. But when I realized that there was the advertising world and there were advertising directors that were amazing, I realized that I couldn't be like them. I had a very strong realization that kind of director was not going to be the director that I could be like. So I would move to nurturing them and finding them and talking to them and being on a set with them and have that feeling of, wow, they are controlling this, or we are controlling this, and we're making this happen, and we make great things happen, which is the greatest thing about our job, right? So, and we have to follow people like you that we bring on set, and we have to follow that whole like talented aspect of the unicorn that we brought on set.
Yeah, and I think it's a funny thing, isn't it, when you're in charge in any capacity as a producer or writer, you have, as you say, you have a responsibility to lead.
Yeah.
You also, when you're on set, you have a very real need to provide answers.
Absolutely.
So I remember very early when I was like 20 and thinking about making my first short film, I met with a TV director, Charles Sturridge, who's a great director, and he said to me, look, if somebody asks you which way should the door open, this way or that way, you don't know, make it up.
Yeah, that's great. That's true.
What you can't say is, oh, I don't know.
I don't know. What would you do?
Stop everyone else doing their job.
That's true.
Just have an answer.
I always tell my directors too, I was like, on set, when they ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, give an answer. Anything. Just anything, right? Just say, don't say, I don't know, because then it all crumbles. Like the whole structure, the whole structure deflates, you know. Like,
and at the same time, I think the relationship between a producer and a director, certainly like in uniform stuff as well, it is wonderful, because there, especially if it's a relationship where you're developing a project over time,
yes,
the director has more possibility to be vulnerable,
absolutely,
to rely on the producer, and to be truly collaborative in what they're making before they get to set.
Yeah,
to say, that's a good idea. Do you like that idea?
Yeah, which is exactly that. I mean, it's when it works well, like we always have directors pushed. We always push them. What would you do? How much would you do? Just make the project as big as you think, and then we'll make it work, right? But don't fall in love with everything. Fall in love with the fact that you're actually telling me how you want to do it. And then we'll, you know, if money doesn't allow you to do certain things, we'll try and figure out different ways to do that, right?
Yeah.
Because it's the only way to, because nobody thinks about the fact that this relationship is the one that brings the good work. Because we have to push. You don't have to think about money, but you have to think about money. I don't have to think about directing, but I have to know directing, right?
Totally. You have to understand the nature of the other person's job.
Absolutely.
And I think dream pitch is kind of interesting, because there's a possibility that you write something in any of the categories that you can write it for the YDA this year. And then you I suppose you might have a choice of giving it to somebody else, another director to make, or of making it yourself.
Yeah, it's true.
And I think sometimes I had the experience of working with another director as a kind of script editor and co-writer recently on a feature. And I kind of loved it, because you get to learn a lot about how this other director works.
Yes.
In very close proximity, while you're also giving him something of your talent.
Absolutely.
So what I would say to the people who are thinking about dream pitches, if you're really keen to direct it, well, that's fantastic, and maybe you will. But even if you don't end up directing it, you will see somebody else working on your material, which will be fantastic.
Yeah, which is you signed it anyway, right?
Yeah.
People forget that we sign things.
Yeah.
We put our names to it, right? We are not just executing something; we are adding a talent to it. So the writer of a project, the idea generator of a project, is important in the mechanism of the project as much as.
Oh my God, so much, so much.
Right. So
as much as, if not more, I would say.
Right. I mean, and depending on the project, but it's true. It's like, you know, it's like if you put words in an actor's mouth that are wrong, it's horrible. If you have an idea that is not told in 12 words, you'll notice it. Everything is part of everything else, right? And we have worked on I have worked on very few, but some ideas that are tellable in 12 words, and we've ruined it with horrible direction.
That's possible too. Yeah. That's
right.
Definitely
but it's also, you know, but it's part of the alchemy that we kind of work with, right, in this business.
Yeah.
Because, as you said, if you want to be a writer, write a novel.
Yeah.
If you want to work in this industry, realize that you're going to work in collaboration with somebody. The director will pick your script and will make it their own, but it will follow the lead, right?
Yeah. And I think it can be very painful, because I think sometimes I've seen this happen for writers, but it also happens to me sometimes when I'm directing, where somebody comes in. I think it's interesting to think about casting.
Yeah.
Because you can have a very clear conception of a character that you've written, or that somebody else has written, and you've discussed it with the writer, and you're like, this is who this character is.
Yeah.
And then another actor comes in who's not at all what you imagined, and they give you a different interpretation of the part. And it's painful on one level, because you're like, well, that's not what I had in mind, but it's really good.
Yeah.
Do I let go of my old idea and embrace the new one, or do I just hold desperately onto the old idea?
It's like an emotional tug of war.
I think it's the same thing. You know, when you've written something, you can see it really clearly in a certain way, but it's also about having the humility sometimes to say, oh, okay, maybe their idea is better.
Yeah.
But good, you know?
Yeah. And maybe when it grows, I will have it literally grow, because otherwise if I suffocate it in what I have in my mind, it will not bloom, right?
No, exactly.
So,
especially when you're a young director,
yeah,
you're starting out, you probably learn a lot more by watching other people work on your material.
Yeah.
And when you're a young writer, I think you have to go through the process of, for good and for bad sometimes, seeing what other directors will do with your work.
I think it's very interesting when I hear you talk about this, because I think you have a consciousness of your borders, which are not set, right? They're liquid. So that you actually have a consciousness that you can move them, right? Because you grow, and when you grow, you become better at something, or you maybe realize that you can't or don't want to do something else.
Yeah.
But it's not normal to not want to participate in everything, right? So sometimes today, especially today, it's like I'm the writer, producer, director, and and it's not because of desperation or very little money that you're the writer, producer, director. Sometimes it's because you want to hold on to everything, right? I was having a talk to a friend who wants to open let's say an idea tank, right? Which is interesting. But the problem that she was having in talking to me, she was like, I have a lot of directors, feature film directors, very famous directors that come to me and maybe have an idea, right? I think to myself, I love the idea that they're giving me, but I would never have it directed by that person. How am I going to tell them? How am I going to tell Mary, I love your idea, I want to have it produced, but can you please
can you
can you give it to me? I'll pay you for it, and then I'll have who is right for it.
What you need to have is a lot of money.
That's true.
And you can buy the idea. No, I'm joking. Some people won't sell their ideas for any money, so of course it's not always about money. But money helps.
Yeah, that's true. Money always helps.
Money does.
Mary,
yeah, you have to cope with rejection.
Yeah, well, also that is the difficult part. It's like rejection comes well when you're actually talking to somebody that takes the rejection of one thing, but gets the accolades of something else, right?
Yeah, know what you're good at, right?
I don't know. Whatever. But that said, Mary, I could talk forever, and I can't tell you how fun it was to talk to you, and I find you incredibly interesting and interested, and I hope for the best. And thank you very much for actually chatting with me today.
Lovely to speak to you. Can't wait to see the work of the young directors.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Love you. Ciao, ciao.
Bye. Ciao.